Here's what's coming up on Network Africa. Japanese peace boat docks in Egypt's Port Said calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. South African woman due to testify against police shot dead outside a court moments before taking the stand. And former head of Togo's army, 4 others jailed over 2020 murder of a high-ranking colonel. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu is in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where he joins other African and world leaders for the Saudi Africa Summit, scheduled to take place on November 10th, 2023. He's expected to reiterate Nigeria's commitment to attract more foreign direct investment and expanding business partnerships, which are strongly reinforced by his administration's ongoing domestic economic reforms. In a statement, the presidency explained that discussions at the first Saudi-Africa summit will revolve around supporting joint action, enhancing political coordination, addressing regional security threats, facilitating economic transformation through research and the local development of new energy solutions, while bolstering cross-sectoral investment cooperation. The president is accompanied by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Yusuf Toga, Minister of Education, Professor Tahir Maman, and the Coordinating Minister of the Economy and Minister of Finance, Mr. Wali Edun, among other top government officials. Now to our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, says war crimes have been committed by both Israel and Hamas in the conflict that erupted just over a month ago. Mr. Turk says the atrocities perpetrated by Hamas are heinous and are war crimes. So also is the collective punishment by Israel of Palestinian civilians. He adds that there are 3 human rights imperatives: the delivery of sufficient humanitarian aid to Gaza, the release of hostages, and to implement a durable end to the conflict.
War crimes, as is the continued holding of hostages. The collective punishment by Israel of Palestinian civilians amounts also to a war crime, as does the unlawful, forcible evacuation of civilians. The massive bombardments by Israel have killed, maimed, and injured, in particular, women and children. The latest death toll that we got from the Gaza Ministry of Health is in excess of 10,500 people, including over 4,300 children and 2,800 women. All of this has an unbearable toll on human lives, on civilians. We have fallen off a precipice. And this cannot continue. Even in the context of a 56-year-old occupation, the current situation is the most dangerous in decades, faced by people in Gaza, first and foremost, then in Israel, in the West Bank, but also regionally. During my visit here, I heard a lot of concerns expressed to me about double standards in the midst of this conflict. Let me be clear, the world cannot afford double standards. We must instead insist upon the universal standards against which we must assess this situation. And this is about international human rights law and international humanitarian law. Gaza has already been described as the world's biggest open-air prison before the 7th of October. under a 56-year-old occupation and a 16-year blockade by Israel. The atrocities that were perpetrated by Palestinian armed groups on the 7th of October were heinous, brutal, and shocking. They were war crimes, as is the continued holding of hostages.
Meanwhile, Mr. Turk has paid a visit to the Rafah border crossing in Egypt. He describes what he saw at the border as a living nightmare. Mr. Turk says United Nations officials are among those trapped at the border.
The lifeline has been unjustly, outrageously thin. In Rafah, I witnessed the gates to a living nightmare. A nightmare where people have been suffocating under persistent bombardment, mourning their families, struggling for water, for food, for electricity and fuel. My colleagues are among those trapped and among those who have lost family members, suffering sleepless nights filled with anguish, despair and agony. Gaza has already been described as the world's biggest open-air prison before the 7th of October, under a 56-year-old occupation and a 16-year blockade by Israel. The atrocities that were perpetrated by Palestinian armed groups on the 7th of October were heinous, brutal, and shocking. They were war crimes, as is the continued holding of hostages. The collective punishment by Israel of Palestinian civilians amounts also to a war crime, as does the unlawful, forcible evacuation of civilians.
In the meantime, a Japanese boat docked in Egypt's port side on Wednesday with 1,800 people on board. The Japan-based humanitarian rights organization Peace Boat is being used to send a message for a ceasefire in Gaza. A long banner could be seen on the ship reading, "Stop Killing Gaza." The Peace Boat embarked on a global cruise in August, which will visit a total of 24 ports in 20 countries as part of its regular educational and cultural exchange programs to promote peace.
This is 40 years of Peace Boat's history. We are here today. We wanted to put this "Stop the Killing Gaza" because what's happening in Gaza right now is unacceptable, and we really want the ceasefire right now. And we also wanted to appeal to the world, to the international community, that we cannot ignore anymore, and we have to raise voice.
The VOA's Edward Uranian joins us now for more. Edward, kindly bring us up to speed on the situation in Egypt and the itinerary of the UN Human Rights Chief's visit there.
Joka, I think a lot of the rhetoric we're hearing really reflect what's actually going on the ground. The intelligence agency that administer saying, and they coordinate according to the situation in it as to what goes in, whether it's safe to let things in, and that's really not reflected in the words that are being used, which are very harsh, designed to create emotion. People are very emotional about this. I see that in Egypt, but using emotional language is not going to help. Is that the media is things and it's not necessarily true. You know, I can see that now by watching Gaza. But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think we seem to have lost the proper connection to Edward there. We're trying to re-establish that so he can give us more detail of what's going on in Egypt. And we'll just continue until we re-establish that. We move on to a tragic development. A South African woman has met her untimely death just moments before taking the stand to testify in court. The yet unidentified woman was reportedly gunned down outside Randburg Court in South Africa. According to local media, she was due to testify against a police officer who was accused of torture. A car pulled up as she was approaching the court before she was shot dead, along with a man who was also a state witness in the case. Authorities are, however, investigating the incident as the motive for the murder is still unknown. Over in Mali, where the United Nations spokesperson for the Secretary General, Stefan Dujarric, has been speaking about the latest attacks on UN peacekeeping convoys. The United Nations says there have now been 6 attacks since the peacekeepers left their base in northern Kidal in Mali on October the 31st. Mr. Dujarric noted that 37 peacekeepers who were injured in the explosives are now in stable condition.
As we reported last week, the convoy traveled nearly 350 kilometers, encountered 6 improvised explosive devices along the way. A total of 37 peacekeepers required medical attention, and all, thank God, have been discharged or in stable condition. 143 vehicles carrying 848 peacekeepers made up the convoy, and those peacekeepers came from Bangladesh, Chad, Egypt, Guinea, and Nepal. As well as the equipment represented the final elements of MINUSMA's accelerated withdrawal from Kidal due to the deteriorating situation. We were told that the convoy was approximately 9 kilometers in length, so you can imagine the challenges. The convoy also had to depart without air support due to the lack of flight clearance from the relevant authorities in Mali, and that of course increased the threat to the safety of the peacekeepers. In addition to insecurity, bad weather and poor road conditions caused vehicles to break down, adding to the challenges the convoy faced on its way to Gao.
Welcome back to the program as we continue with our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. And back with us is VOA's Edward Uranian, who joins us from Cairo. Edward, I asked you earlier to bring us up to speed on the situation in Egypt and the itinerary of the UN Human Rights Chief's visit to the country. I'm afraid, okay. Right, Edward, thank you for joining us once again. I did ask you to help us understand, bring us up to speed with the situation in Egypt and the itinerary of the Human Rights Chief's visit.
Well, I think Human Rights Chief really can't do much at the border other than give a speech. So he really went and came back. What he's able to accomplish is really vague because, as I said earlier, intelligence agencies are the ones that coordinate what goes through the border crossing. And I don't think the UN is really going to be able to influence, given there's a lot of concern about a number of things going in because they're going to us. And as I also think a lot of emotional tugging on done by the media, but it's not always faithful to what's going on the ground. Because basically, what they're trying to do is get fuel to Hamas, and I don't think it's really help the situation, at least ending this conflict, because Hamas is part of the problem.
We do apologize. We can't quite hear Edward there. His audio is a bit shaky, and we will try to reestablish that as soon as we can get that sorted out. But let's just move on to some other stories in the meantime. The former head of Togo's army, General Abalo Kandangha, has been sentenced to 20 years in prison over the murder of a high-ranking colonel, Lieutenant Colonel Bitala Majubla. A military court also sentenced 4 other soldiers over the murder. 2 of them, including the victim's driver, bagged 15 years in prison, while the remaining 2 received 5 years each. 51-year-old Lieutenant Majulba, who commanded the Togo's elite 1st Rapid Intervention Battalion, was found dead in his office at a military base on May 4, 2020, the day after President Nyasingbe was sworn in for his 4th term. An autopsy found that the colonel died of a bullet wound. And those convicted were stripped of their military status in order to pay the state damages of more than $1.6 million. The International Criminal Court has opened an investigation in March 2011 focused on alleged crimes against humanity committed in Libya since the 15th of February 2011. Briefing the United Nations Security Council on the situation, the prosecutor of the ICC, Karim Khan, says over 4,000 evidence has been collected during the probe. Mr. Khan noted that video evidence, audio materials, as well as satellite imagery have been presented during the investigative period and expected them to be completed by the end of 2025.
We have continued to accelerate our investigative activities. The team has undertaken in this reporting period over 15 missions in 3 regions, collecting over 4,000 items of evidence. This includes video evidence, audio material, forensic information, satellite imagery, as well as conducting numerous witness screenings and witness interviews. I am of the view that the results of this new strategic approach are significant and are clearly discernible. But as we continue to build on this momentum, it is critical that my office continues to proactively and meaningfully engage with this council, with the government of Libya, and of course with survivors, to begin to chart a path that leads to the successful completion of our investigative activities in relation to the situation as a whole.
Kenya's government has imposed a charge for national identity cards. The charge was introduced without any advance notice. This move has sparked massive reactions in the country, provoking the anger of many citizens. Until now, Kenyans have acquired ID cards for free upon reaching the age of 18, but new applicants now face a fee of 1,000 Kenyan shillings. The cost of replacing ID cards has also increased 20-fold to 2,000 shillings. The new charges, which come amid a spiraling cost of living crisis, have ignited widespread outcry among Kenyans, especially on social media. And finally on the program, as war in neighboring Sudan shifts beef importers' focus to Chad, the bustling cutting room of Laham to Chad looks set to fulfill the country's ambitious attempt to transcend from being a live cattle trader to an African meat export heavyweight. Arise Integrated Industrial Platforms, a Pan-African venture, plans to invest over 330 million euros to make it happen.
It's a state-of-the-art meat processing facility outside the town of Mundu in Chad's rural south. Smartly attired staff are hard at work carving the livestock. Laham Chad's assistant quality manager, Ashkeb Rajoria, believes this is the beginning of the transformation of how livestock is sold and ultimately the entire nation's economic trajectory.
Before Chad, they don't not following any food safety here. They are used to slaughter animal on the street. This very unhygienic and very dangerous to their health also. Now we have set up a proper unit where we can put every food safety norms, and we are ensuring that our product is 100% safe as per the microbial contamination, as per the human consumption, and we are giving the best premium quality as we can give in whole Chad.
Arise Integrated Industrial Platforms, AIIP, a pan-African venture partly owned by the Africa Finance Corporation, plans to invest over 330 million euros to create 7 specialized industrial zones powered by dedicated electric plants to facilitate the processing of livestock into meat for export. Laham Chad, owned 65% by AIIP and 35% by the Chadian state, is at the center of that plan, where beyond the slaughterhouse and refrigeration facilities, investors are working to build the country's first livestock quarantine zone and fattening farm. With an estimated 110 million head of cattle, the livestock sector is a cornerstone of Chad's economy, second only to oil in revenue, contributing 30% to the GDP and supporting nearly 40% of the population, and that's according to World Bank figures. Chad exports over 1 million cattle and as many small ruminants annually. But traditionally, these animals are transported live, limiting outflows and posing risks to herdsmen who often pass through conflict zones to reach their destinations. The transition to processed meat exports is complex, however, in a nation where wealth is measured by herd size and pastoralism does not yield standardized livestock. Sourcing ideal weight and vaccinated animals remains a challenge, as does competing with cheaper exporters in industrialized countries. But National Partnership Director Abdulrazak Arabi believes Chad's pastoralist approach to cattle breeding gives it a unique advantage on the international stage. Breeders like Ali are enthusiastic, believing the strategic pivot toward processed meat exports could reshape Chad's economic landscape, generating revenue and creating jobs while maintaining the pastoral practices that define its livestock industry.
We are already seeing that the demand from slaughterhouses has increased in terms of the number of cattle to be supplied daily. We are able to supply as many cattle as they require.
Currently, we are running on the low capacity, but we are planning to set up more units because demand is high. So to cope up with the demand, we are opening new plants in Chad and Jamena also, so we can cope up with the demand.
Targeting markets like Gabon, Egypt, and Nigeria, Laham Chad began exporting frozen meat to Gabon via refrigerated trucks in June. The company aims to process and export 200 cattle and 400 small animals daily, competing against Indian, Argentine, and Brazilian meats.
Well, that's it on the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joke Rogers. Bye for now.